Hello, welcome to episode 20 of Ask a Brit, the format in which you ask me, a Brit, any question you like, but by using the hashtag AskABrit down in the comments beneath this video or any video of mine. And this is volume 20. That's sort of a milestone, isn't it? I remember reaching the age of 20 and being rather underwhelmed, so hopefully this will exceed those expectations. But the first question today comes from JWB52Z, who asks, I know about things like the chalk ice, but I was wondering if the UK has snow cones, or can you get the Italian ice or gelato while there? It's been a long time since I've had ice cream in the UK. The only memory I really have is of having a Magnum and a 99 Flake. As for the snow cone, this was something that I don't think I was even aware of in terms of its existence until moving to the US. I've barely actually had any since moving here. You'll be sad to know, I think. And as for gelato, yes, I think the Italian ice creams are very much available in the UK. For me, though, as I said, they take a backseat to the 99 Flake. I mean, what doesn't? Few things, apparently, these days, because it's going out of style. Next question comes from Keith Myers, and Keith asks a very good question. I remember there was a BBC programme called Ground Force, yes, there was, could still be, I've no idea, that remade people's backyards into floral and plant gardens, and it aired on BBC America back in the day. If possible, would you have a floral and plant garden in the backyard of a house that you owned? Well, I've never personally owned a house, but my parents have certainly had the typical British garden. And when I say British garden, it's usually quite well kept, you know, very, very green grass, but not too superficial, as tends to be the case in America. And, you know, it was something that my mother always kept up and I think still does to this day. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mum, because I know you're probably watching. That was sort of my first and sustained introduction to British gardening. I never partook myself. I have to admit and absolve myself of any responsibility on that score. And since I've left my parents' home, I've not really had a garden. I've lived in apartment complexes that usually take care of that themselves. We have had the odd plant or two, sometimes very odd plant, in the case of Bertie, the cacti that we have outside, cactus singular in this case. It would be very nice to have a pristine, idyllic garden to which to retire in the afternoon, and also a gardener to keep it up. Up next, Mark Oldgeezer. When was the last time you were in England, and did you feel at home there, or did you feel like a visitor in England? Good question, Mark, and I'm going to be touching on that actually in a video that's coming out this Thursday. But the truth is, I've not actually been back to England since I left it in 2008. It is often the topic of discussion in my internal monologue, along with some other disturbing conversations that take place there. I've had the odd conversation with Brits, friends of mine from back home, who have touched on certain things, like the classic dingy pubs of Britain are on the wane because of chains and things like that. But on the whole, I don't think you really get an understanding of how a place has changed or not changed unless you're actually living there on a day-to-day basis. Of course, recently Brexit has happened, and I think that's set off a lot of alarm bells economically, to where the country is sort of in this position right now where it doesn't quite know what the future holds. I don't know what the present holds because I've just not been back there, but I do long to get back there at some point. All right, fourth question comes from Selena Walsh, who asks, it's been explained to me before, but I've yet to grasp it. Can you please explain to me the difference between the UK and US school grade levels, like sixth form and such? I'm used to K through 12, so once you add all of those others, I feel I need to go back to school. I'm so confused that I'm not sure where at this point. And by the way, love your show. It's quite brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting difference that, you know, obviously there are different types of schools and we have different terminology for how we, describe those schools. But to answer your specific question about, the grade system versus what they have here in the US. Firstly, we don't use the term grade like you would do. So 5th grade, 6th grade and all of that. So as I understand it, your kindergarten would be our year 1, right? And so once you get to 1st grade, we're calling that year 2. 2nd grade is year 3 and so on and so on. And we get all the way up to what you call 12th grade, senior year is year 13 in a sense for us. But that's where you're looking at things like sixth form college. So I went to sixth form college from the age of 16 through 18, in theory. So in a way, I think that that's like what you would call the sort of the last 2 years of high school, I believe. That's my understanding of it. Correct me if I'm wrong. It is quite complicated. But I went to a sixth form college before going to university. That's an important distinction to make as well, is that you call university college a lot of the time, unless you're referring to the actual physical place itself, like, Butler University, for example. Whereas we don't. We say uni and all of that. But college for us, most of the time, or a lot of the time, is a sixth form institution that you would go to for those years between 16 and 18, ahead of going to university, and we'd take A-levels. I hope that somewhat answers your question. I fear I may have confused you further, and myself, for that matter. Not my intention, I assure you. I'm not an education professional, but I did put together a list on my website a few years ago looking at the sort of terminological differences between British and American schools. I'll put the link to that in my description below. Okay, the next question comes from A. Wasef, who asks, in your experience, are people generally shocked to hear an American accent over in the UK? I think it definitely depends on where in the UK you are. If you're in London, no, there'd be no shock at all. I mean, I think that Americans are quite a prevalent part of the population in London, and potentially at certain big university towns where there's a lot of American students that come over. If you met an American in Grimsby, where I'm from, it's almost akin to meeting a celebrity. I know that my wife went there, and she stood out, for being this exotic traveller. It's almost like that stereotypical scene where somebody could walk into the bar if they're an outsider, and the whole pub goes quiet and turns and looks. I almost wanted that to happen when I took her to the Old Wetherspoons in Grimsby. Sadly, nobody did, because the Old Wetherspoons is very loud and nobody even recognised she was American anyway. And everybody was pissed. Drunk, not angry. That distinction to be made. Susie Q, in response to something I said last week about a huge medical bill that my wife and I received a few years ago. Are you still paying that huge medical bill, or did emergency benefits take care of it? I work in a 6-doctor orthopedic surgery office, and I've heard the stories from patients. Thankfully, an assistance program in Indiana was able to take care of it. It happened at the worst time because it was this sort of short window in which neither of us had health insurance, right? And thankfully, because of that, though, the assistance program was able to help us out and eventually forgive every single part of the bill. But, it did fill us with dread at first to see that bill come through for $119,000. That is insane. And the final question today comes from William Wen. That's the YouTube name of the week because I like the alliteration of it. And William asks, would you mind pointing out some good British chocolate and the respective brands, as well as where to find them, please? I'm currently in the US. I tried to ask my mum, who has British ancestry, about that, but it was not so successful because her ancestors already migrated from Britain to East Asia a long time ago. So we're not so familiar with the British Isles anymore. Thanks for sharing your information. Well, to give a plug to Cadbury, I think that I've said this before, my favourite chocolate bars are Whisper, Flake. It goes back and forth as to which one is 1 and 2. Crunchy, actually that's sometimes number 1. Bounty, which is like your Mounds chocolate bar. All of these are available at specialty shops. I did a video a few weeks ago, in fact, from Ohio at Jungle Jim's international store that does a plethora of British chocolate. You can get almost everything there. Of course, the prices are ramped up a little bit, but I'll link to that video at the end of this, William, so you can take a look at that. But if you're nowhere near Ohio, there are other ways to do it. I mean, again, there are specialty stores in a lot of states. But if you didn't want to travel to these places, you can get them online as well. Again, the prices do tend to go up for them, but there are different stores online that you'll want to check out. I would just Google, British chocolate online service in America, and you'll find actually quite a few of them. I will say this, that, because of Kraft's takeover of Cadbury, there are certain sales permissions that have been altered in the last few years. So you may not be getting the real deal all the time. So I would do that. And again, check out the link at the end of this video for the visit I made to Jungle Jim's international store. It'll blow your mind, William. All right, and so that is it for this episode of Ask a Brit. Again, if you have a question for me, leave it in the comments below and use the hashtag AskABrit. And until next time, have a fabulous week, everybody. Bye.